Hi everybody, welcome to our webinar. My name is Josh Adler and I'm the founding CEO of Sourcewater Inc. We are the leading company in oilfield water market intelligence. And today I'm going to tell you a bit about what that means and something about all the new technologies that we've been developing to help you understand what is going on out there in oilfield water markets. Now, before we get to the new technologies and take you through that, I want to tell you a little bit about Sourcewater. Our mission is to show where all oilfield water is, was, and will be on the surface and in the subsurface. Then we help our clients make the best business, investment, and operational decisions. So, Sourcewater originated in some ideas I had when I was a Sloan Fellow at MIT back in 2012 in a program called Energy Ventures. And early on in that program, we saw a slide that looked something like this, except that it was still 2012. And even back in 2012, I could see that the amount of water going in and out of the upstream energy process was just rocketing from what it had ever been before. And so my question as an entrepreneur was, whatever it is that's new about this huge growth industry is where they're going to need help and where there's going to be an opportunity to solve problems and create value. And after spending about a year and a half on it, it seemed to me that the area that was really new about unconventional energy versus conventional traditional energy was the water. For the first time, water was the biggest thing by far into or out of the upstream energy process. Huge amounts going in for hydraulic fracturing that were never needed before, and even huger amounts coming out both as flowback and produced water. And I'm going to come back to this graph in a little bit, but as you can see, we're talking about a growth in the energy market that has never been seen before, and water is in the middle of it. So my first idea for how to address this opportunity in oilfield water markets was really asking the question, okay, now that water is the biggest thing into and out of the entire upstream energy process, how do they know where to get it? How do they know where to send it? What should the fair market price be, and what do you do when it doesn't show up when you need it? And my original idea was to create an online marketplace for water sourcing, recycling, and disposal, kind of like Airbnb for water in the oil and gas industry. However, that has evolved a lot since then. We have gotten thousands of people on our water marketplace, and we've had tons of transactions, lots of people buying and selling water and disposal, but that's not really what our company is all about today. Because what we found happening was we were getting tons of visitors to our website who were basically using it as a research tool, trying to understand where is water coming from and going to, who has it, who needs it, what are the capacities and utilization levels of disposal and recycling and pits and ponds in the marketplace. And so we realized what we needed to do was create more of a GIS intelligence platform, that is a geographic information system that would allow people to see what's going on with water assets all over the market. And that's called Water Map. Then we were able to acquire our only competitor in the space, a company that had been called Digital H2O, and they had some really great technology for showing the exact flows and supply chain relationships between every producing oil and gas lease and every commercial disposal well. And so we bought them back in late 2018 and incorporated that into our system, and I'm going to tell you more about that in a little bit. And then more recently, we were able to acquire another business called Wellsite Navigator, which is the most popular oilfield smartphone app ever. There's actually more than 60,000 active users, and we're going to be doing some really cool things with that I'm going to mention as well. Along the way, we've picked up a lot of really great clients, some of the biggest names in the industry, like ConocoPhillips and Schlumberger and a whole bunch of others. They don't all let me use their logo and name on our slideshow, but I assure you there's a whole bunch more that aren't on here, some of the biggest companies in the industry. And we're very grateful to have all those clients. And we've really learned a lot and only been able to develop the platform that we have because of all of the feedback and input that we've gotten from our customers over these many years that we've been working on this company. And we really appreciate that. Also, you should know that we're based in downtown Houston, Texas. We've got about 24, 25 people here today, and we keep adding more. Everybody who works for Sourcewater lives and works in Houston, Texas. So let's come back to this incredible chart that shows the growth of water production in the Permian Basin in the U.S. over the last 20 years. So this is really why we're all here, because as you can see, the growth of water production from unconventional energy is just vast and unprecedented. We're talking about billions and billions of barrels of water per year coming out of the ground. And by the way, a lot of people don't realize the upstream energy industry produces about 10 times as much water as it consumes. So to be clear, this water coming out of the ground, only a small part of it is the water that went in the ground. By far, most of it is water that was already down there that's now coming up. Basically, the Permian Ocean from 100 million years ago that's now coming up with the oil. And a lot of people don't realize, but the average oil well in Texas produces 7 or 8 barrels of water, naturally occurring water, for every 1 barrel of oil. In some parts of the Permian, like the Delaware Basin, that ratio can be more than 10 barrels of water for every 1 barrel of oil. In the Midland Basin, the ratio is lower, but there's always way more water than oil coming up. And in fact, the cost of getting rid of all of that salt water that comes up with the oil is not just the largest cost of producing oil in the Permian Basin and in other markets. It's actually a majority of the total operating cost of producing every barrel of oil. So this isn't just a niche part of the industry. This is the industry. The industry sells oil to pay for moving water around. So that sounds like a great opportunity because there's just been incredible growth. And because it's so new, I mean, this whole thing started taking off basically, kind of in 2009, but really in 2013. So you're talking about a whole massive $40 billion industry just in the United States that basically didn't exist 7 years ago. That's an incredible opportunity for anybody who's involved with it. But there's a tricky part to it. Here's the tricky part. It's really exciting to see that incredible hockey stick growth of water production and know that there's a $40 billion business opportunity there. But here's the problem. All water is local. Sometimes everybody's in the water. Sometimes there is no water around. That's why you need market intelligence. Because knowing that there's a giant market-wide opportunity does absolutely nothing for you in any given moment in time or location on the map. All water is local. And the Permian Basin, where most of this opportunity is located, is really, really big. It's almost 100,000 square miles. There's close to 500,000 oil and gas wells. Over 4 billion barrels of water is produced per year. There's over 8,000 operators who own those oil and gas wells, and there's over 8,000 saltwater disposals, with hundreds more coming every year, where most of that water goes today. In fact, the Permian Basin is the size of 9 U.S. states combined. Or, put another way, it's the size of all of New England, including Maine. And Maine's actually a pretty good-sized state. But the Permian isn't just huge and complicated in the X and Y axes on the map. The Permian is also incredibly complex and deep in the subsurface. In fact, there are 47 different potential saltwater disposal formations under the ground in the Permian Basin. So in any given spot on the map, there are certain depths below that spot that have lots of capacity to take water. there are other places in that exact same spot on the map in the subsurface that are totally overpressured and can't take any more water and can even be dangerous if you put more water into them. And then there's the time factor, because it's not enough just to know the X, the Y, and the Z of where there's enough water and where there's not enough, where there's enough disposal and where there's not enough, and where there's recycling need. You have to know exactly when we are talking about those flows. Sometimes there are a whole bunch of operators in an area who are hydraulic fracturing right now who need lots of water, or are about to flow back lots and lots of water that needs a lot of disposal in a short time. That also creates great opportunities for recycling water. Other times, nobody's fracking. In some places, there's lots of water going into the disposals, and they're totally full because of all the flow back going into the pipelines. Other times, the pipelines are empty. So you don't just need to know the X and the Y and the Z, you need to know the T, the time, and that makes the complexity of the water market exponential. So here are examples of a few of the dozens of water intelligence questions that we get asked every day. These are the kinds of things that we're trying to answer. A lot of oil field service companies, especially if they do something with water, are asking us who has produced water where, and who needs treatment, disposal, logistics, equipment, pumps, pipes, construction, chemicals, you name it, relating to the treatment and handling and disposal of produced water. Who's got water where? Every oil field service company that touches water wants to know that. Now, the saltwater disposal companies and the companies that build water infrastructure want to know where will water production exceed capacity on the surface and or in the subsurface, so they can figure out where are the best places to build new water pipeline, storage, and disposal capacity, because they're going to put hundreds of millions of dollars, sometimes billions of dollars into those projects, and you don't want to put them in the wrong place, so they need that kind of data. For operators, or exploration and production companies, they're often asking us, how much water will our new oil and gas wells produce? Depends what formation you're drilling into, what frac techniques you're using, what's going on in that subsurface, what you're doing for your completion. And then, when that water starts coming up, where should I send it? Who has capacity around here? Who has low or high pressure levels? Who's getting too much water from my competitors already? Where are the pipelines passing by me that I can tap into? Where can I get the best deal for that? Who's got the capacity? Who's got too much utilization? Another question that a lot of operators ask us is, how will subsurface conditions impact my oil and gas and saltwater disposal well plans? So, consider this. When you're drilling a well deep into the ground, whether it's an oil or gas well, or a saltwater disposal well where you're going to put water down, you need to know all kinds of things about the subsurface conditions that you are going to be drilling through. Which formations are you going to be drilling through? Where are the true tops and bottoms of those formations? And if they're porous formations that might have water in them or can take water, what are the pressure levels, the porosity, and the permeability for those formations as you drill through them? Things can get really complex as you're drilling through there. Not just for the disposal wells, where of course that kind of subsurface insight is absolutely essential. I mean, you need to know where you're going to land that disposal, where you're going to inject that water, and what kind of pressure and capacity and flow rate should you expect from that zone where you're injecting the water, so you can design that well. But it's also a huge issue when you're designing and drilling oil and gas wells, because if you drill through an overpressured disposal formation in the subsurface to get to your hydrocarbons, there's the potential that you're going to flood your hydrocarbon reservoir with somebody else's old salt water that was in that formation that was above it. Or you can cause that water to migrate into other oil and gas wells and have it start coming out of the ground. So there's a lot of really, really important subsurface data involved with water and drilling planning. Another kind of question we get is from private equity companies and investors. They want to know how to due diligence the supply and demand and price or cost of water for operators and for water midstream companies and disposal companies. Now, on the operator side, water is just becoming a bigger and bigger part of their cost and risk of operations and of new development. And so companies that are smart about making those investments are trying to understand how are water market dynamics going to impact our E&P investments. And of course, on the water infrastructure side, where they're considering making big investments, they have to understand, is this investment I'm being pitched for real? Is there really all of this water in this location coming soon that needs a place to go? Or are they telling me something that isn't really true, or that's kind of dicey? How do I know what those prices are going to be like? What's the ROI going to be and the utilization level going to be for new or existing water infrastructure in this area in the future? If you're a smart investor, you need to figure that out for yourself, not just rely on the information that you're getting from the person who's trying to sell you the investment. So the great news is, Sourcewater, for the last 7 years, has been developing all kinds of data and analytics systems to be able to answer all those kinds of questions and many, many more. So what I'm going to talk about today is, first, an overview of the ways that we gather data and what kind of data we're gathering, and then a lot of different aspects of our water intelligence platform that you can't find anywhere else that allow you to answer those kinds of questions and many, many others. So let's get started on that. First, let me give you an overview of some of the many different kinds of data sources that we are gathering into Sourcewater's water intelligence platform. Because I think in the energy data industry, we are unique in the diversity of sources that we are gathering our intelligence from. So first, of course, we have the original and only water marketplace, which gives us insight into real-world ask and transactional prices for water and disposal in a bunch of the major shale plays in the U.S., especially the Permian Basin. There's nothing else like that in the world. The second major area is all kinds of government records and regulatory sources. Now, this type of source is basically what every other company that does any kind of energy market intelligence does. Basically, they all just scrape regulatory records from places like the Railroad Commission and then stick it on a map. And we do that, but we do it a lot more and better for water data. We also do it for a lot of the traditional types of upstream energy data to give you context. And we do a lot of very specialized data science-based quality assurance and data integrity checks to make sure that the data we're showing you isn't just the raw stuff pulled from these various regulatory sources, which can be very late, incomplete, and erroneous. We do a lot to improve the quality of that data, and we're always making those improvements. We also gather a lot of data from active market research. We actually pick up the phone, and we have people whose job is just to call water market players every day and every week and find out what's going on out there. Is this thing that we saw for real? What are you seeing in the market? And we feed that into our system. We also do some really interesting kinds of internet data scraping that's not just regulatory records, which I'll be talking about a bit. We gather really interesting geospatial location data from our mobile app users, which allows us to understand what's going on in the market. And then we do some really cool cutting-edge things with satellite imagery analytics that allow us to see what's happening on the ground on a day-to-day basis way, way faster than if you're just relying on the old, out-of-date government regulatory records, which almost always take months, if not a year or more, to come to light. The first category of data that I'm going to talk about is our marketplace listings. So the great thing about marketplace listings is this is real information from real people. It's not intermediated by a regulator or some other kind of reporting. We actually allow people to log into our system, at sourcewater.com and create listings of water or disposal that they have for sale or that they want to buy. And that information feeds into our water intelligence platform so that you can see, because they want you to see, what the prices are that people are asking, either for water for sale or for disposal capacity for sale. The result of that is we're actually able to map out what's going on with prices in oil field water markets all over Texas and the Permian Basin, both on the water sourcing side and on the water disposal and recycling side, because there's different prices for different kinds of water, such as fresh water may cost more than recycled water. And on the disposal side, there's different rates at different disposals depending on what their utilization levels are, how busy they are, how much they want your business, and whether you can hook up by pipeline or by truck. The second category of data that we gather is a really, really big one, government records. We do more with government records than anything else. We have a whole big data engineering team here. But we also do something really special, which is, first, we do a lot with water records that no one else does. And also, we do a lot of data science to assure the quality and integrity of that data that we're gathering. We don't just give you the raw stuff. So for water intelligence purposes in Texas, probably the most interesting and unique regulatory data source is what's called the P18 Skim Oil Report. P18s are around so that the state of Texas knows basically where to attribute royalties for skim oil sales when saltwater disposals skim a little bit of oil from the wastewater they receive and sell it off. And this form's been around for decades. It wasn't really intended to report water volumes, but it just so happens that on these forms, it also shows how much water came with that skim oil, and it shows which lease that water and skim oil came from so they know where to attribute it. And what you're seeing right now is just the cover page of one of these forms. Every saltwater disposal that sells any oil in Texas has to file one of these forms every month, but you're just seeing the cover page. These forms can be hundreds of pages long every month with 80 plus lines of data per page, and a lot of times they're handwritten and they're really messy. We actually have to have people type in every single one of these pages, tens of thousands of pages per month, and then we actually have multiple people type each one in for quality assurance purposes. And we use all kinds of algorithms to make sure that whatever was typed in wasn't too crazy, that it's accurate, that it matches up with things in the past, as I'll talk about a little more. So it's really, really expensive and difficult to enter this data well from these P18 forms. But the outcome you get from it is really, really cool, because after entering all that P18 data every month, we are able to actually map how much water comes from every single producing lease in Texas, and we're able to show exactly where that water goes for disposal if it's going to commercial disposal. Going in the other direction, for every commercial disposal, we're able to show where all of their water came from and how much. In fact, what you're really seeing is a month. Another type of regulatory data that we gather is from H10s. H10s are annual reports that are filed for every single disposal and injection well in the state of Texas that show for each month up in that annual period how much water was injected into that well and what was the peak and average pressure. And so we're able to use that to map the pressure and volume utilizations month by month for every single injection and disposal well. Then within our map, you can select an area and be able to characterize what are the current levels and trends for water volumes and water pressures for all the disposals in that area. Now, I was mentioning earlier that the raw regulatory data that comes from these different forms can have a lot of errors and omissions in it. And there's a whole bunch of reasons for that. But the important thing is we've developed all kinds of data science-based algorithms and data engineering methods to be able to quality assure that data and achieve the highest possible data integrity within our system. In fact, you can see on this map that in almost every county in the Permian Basin, there are a high level of data errors and a large amount of quality assurance needed to ensure you get the most accurate data. In fact, in Andrews County there, over 40% of the saltwater disposals had significant data integrity problems. And in most of these counties, somewhere from 20 to 40% of the wells had data integrity problems. Here's just one example of what I mean when I talk about data integrity problems. So this is just one saltwater disposal, and we were looking at the H10 data for it going back 40 years. And what you see is that in just 2 months, out of all the months in the last 40 years, there were hugely wrong numbers entered on those forms. 7,000 times off from the normal levels. What happened? I don't know. Somebody had fat fingers. They added a couple extra zeros they didn't need to. Who knows? But if you are looking at that disposal well today, trying to figure out its capacity or its performance over the last 40 years, just because of 2 wrong numbers in 40 years, you are going to get a result that misstates the capabilities of that well by 22%. From just 2 wrong numbers in 40 years, that's how wrong they can be. That's just one example. We do all kinds of analysis to identify those kinds of errors and many, many others, and normalize all the data to make sure that you get the most reliable, accurate, timely water intelligence data about what's really going on in the field. Another thing we do is track the statuses of every single saltwater disposal permit. So we don't just tell you when a disposal permit has been filed, we tell you whether it's been protested, whether it's pending, whether it's been accepted, whether it's withdrawn, and whether it's been approved, so that you can track the whole life cycle and figure out when is competition for my disposal coming, where is that competition coming, where is their new capacity to take my water coming, where's it going to be, who has it, what's the timeline for that, what time and cost and risk should I expect when I file my next permit. And I'm excited to announce in this webinar that we have a totally new data technology that we have just come out with after working on it for the last couple of years, called SWD Pre-Permit Alert. Now, this is something that you cannot get anywhere else, and you'll never get it anywhere else because we've got a patent pending on it. So what you need to know is, in the states of Texas, New Mexico, Oklahoma, and probably some others, before you are allowed to file your permit application, you have to publish a public legal notice that informs the public in the county where you are going to drill that disposal well that you are planning to file for a permit. And the reason that that's required is because your disposal well could impact your neighbors in various ways. Water injected into that disposal could interfere with a hydrocarbon reservoir nearby. Or maybe neighbors don't want the traffic from the trucks that are going to be driving in and out of that disposal. Or maybe your competitors don't want more competition for the water that they're trying to bring to their businesses. For all kinds of reasons, you're required to publish that legal notice before you can submit your permit to the Railroad Commission or to the Office of State Engineer. Now, of course, people filing those public notices file them in the smallest, most local, hard-to-spot papers that they possibly can, because they don't actually want you to see those notices. And even if you do see the notice doesn't tell you exactly where the disposal is going. It just tells you it's 13.5 miles northeast of Orla, or wherever it is. it doesn't give you an exact latitude and longitude. And so what we've done is we've built a system that scans and scrapes and analyzes using natural language processing over 900 local newspapers every single day. And we pick out just the public legal notices that apply to injection and disposal wells, because there's a lot of kinds of legal notices out there, like for bankruptcies and estate sales and probate court. We just pull out the ones for disposals every single day, and we put them on a map that day, so that if you're using our system, you will never miss one of these notices. And one of the really interesting things about this is, by doing this scan every single day, we have found that we are able to show you where new saltwater disposals are going to go in the Permian Basin, on average 39 days sooner than when the application is filed. And once the application is filed, if it's not protested, it generally gets approved within about 2 months, sometimes even within a few weeks. So you really don't have much time to react to a new application. We're pretty much doubling the amount of time that you have to react by giving you all this additional lead time. And we're kind of giving you belt and suspenders so you won't miss anything. So here's how it looks. And what you're seeing right now is a screenshot from our water map, water intelligence platform. We place these arcs on the map that are the greatest possible range for where that disposal will go, since the newspaper ads don't actually tell us exactly where it will go. But we tell you who the operator is, which county, the field, and the range where it could go. And as soon as that permit goes in, we narrow it down to the exact spot where it is going to appear. And again, we're able to do this a month to 6 weeks sooner than you're able to see it if you're just waiting for those permit applications to come out. Plus, in our system, you're able to mark the map with your areas of interest so that you get alerts for when a new disposal is coming to your area of interest on the same day when that notice comes out. So you don't have to go search and clip those newspapers day after day after day and then figure out where to place that notice on the map, because there's actually no easy way to do it. And our algorithms for gathering and placing these locations are patent pending. Another area of data that we gather that is absolutely essential to oil field water market intelligence today is seismicity data. Now, you might have heard some of the news stories about how sometimes certain overpressure disposals in certain regions, like parts of Oklahoma, have been tied to increased seismicity, basically earthquakes. Not all seismicity is caused by saltwater disposal injections, and there's a lot of variations there. But it's pretty clear that in some places these things are linked. And because of that, regulatory agencies in Oklahoma, in Texas, in New Mexico, and all around the country are getting much more sensitive to making sure that they very carefully check whether any new or existing saltwater disposal could cause or be related to or impact seismicity in the area that it's planned for or where it's operating. And so if you're in the saltwater disposal business, you absolutely must always know about any seismic activity anywhere near your area of operation or where you're planning to go. We gather that every single day, and we put it right on the map for you. We also show you every single surface landowner in Texas and New Mexico, because water rights and the rights of way needed to move water, either to a well or from a well, are all governed by the surface ownership, not the mineral ownership. So we show you who owns every single parcel of land with their contact information so that you can talk to them and work out a deal for that right of way and make sure that you've got the ability to get your water to where you need it, or get it from where you need it or where you want to get it, before you start buying those minerals or making those contracts and finding out that you've gotten landlocked. And another completely new technology we have, which is not available anywhere else, is we now have a Permian water infrastructure overlay. So we've got close to 50 water pipeline networks mapped in our system as an overlay with all of the other data we provide. And that's crucial because when a pipeline is linked to a disposal or to a water source, what matters is not where is the disposal or where is the water source. What matters is how close are you to that pipeline and can you tap into it? Everything is going toward pipelines and water infrastructure and away from trucks today because it costs so much less to move high volumes of water through pipelines than through trucks. And once the pipelines are built, it's much safer and has a lot less impact on communities than moving water in trucks. So you have to know where these pipelines are. But unlike oil and gas pipelines, water pipelines are not required to be reported to the Railroad Commission. It's just one of these regulatory things. Oil and gas has to be reported, water doesn't. And so there are no public maps of where this water infrastructure is located. But we go out and use a bunch of data gathering methods, including just asking for them, to make sure that we can put them on the map for you. And in fact, lots of water pipeline and disposal companies want to be in our map because our marketplace is able to offer their capacity for sale when they're not full. So it's actually a great idea to put your water pipeline in our map because we can help you sell that capacity and do more business on it once it's built or while you're planning it. Another really cool map overlay that we've got that you can't get anywhere else is the power grid. So why does it matter to have the power grid in a water intelligence platform? Here's the reason. Remember how there's a ratio of about 10 barrels of water to 1 barrel of oil in the Permian Basin? Well, water is the heaviest, most voluminous thing getting moved around the upstream oil and gas business. And that means that the power needed to drive all of those pumps is the single most expensive and largest consumer of energy in the upstream energy business. And so the question of whether you are able to get access to overhead power versus running a diesel generator at your location or a location that you're planning, that makes all the difference in the cost effectiveness or even the feasibility of developing that facility, because it costs about 10 times more to generate power from diesel than to get it from the overhead grid. And so you have to know where that grid is when you're planning these water facilities. Another cool new feature that we offer is we track the rigs in the Permian Basin and in other regions all throughout the country. We don't have all of them yet, but a lot of our clients have asked for this because knowing who's drilling where helps you understand where is the water supply and demand going and where's it going to be next. And of course, it should go without saying, but it needs to be said, we also gather and map all of the oil and gas data in the upstream energy market. We show where every oil and gas well is located, in addition to showing all of the disposal, injection, and water wells. Because if you're using a water data platform and you don't have the oil and gas permit and production and wellbore information totally integrated into it, you're basically driving a truck with 3 wheels. You can't answer your questions, you can't do business. You have to have both the source and the sink for the water. Finally, we've added a whole bunch of really cool project planning and area of interest alerts into our system. So you can map out and plan all of your facilities, your pipelines, your disposals, your water pits, and then share them with your colleagues and with your clients to make sure everybody's on the same page and working on the same stuff at the same time. Okay, now I get to start talking about some of the really cool stuff that we're doing. I know that last part, I hope, was pretty impressive, but now we get into the satellite imagery analytics and some other things where we're really inventing new data science and new methods for understanding what's happening on the ground, often the same day it happens, rather than waiting 3 or 6 or 12 or 15 months for energy data to come out of the regulatory agencies. So basically, every other energy data platform out there is looking at the past, sometimes way in the past. What we are doing with our satellite imagery technology is we are looking at today or a couple days ago rather than way into history. And that allows you to understand what's really happening on the ground now and to be able to predict a lot better what's about to happen in the future. And I should add that this technology is an area where we're so innovative that we've had 5 US patents granted on the use of satellite imagery for understanding and analyzing energy infrastructure on the ground. Not just pending, but actually granted. So where this came from is kind of funny. A few years ago, we spent a lot of time out in West Texas trying to find people who own frac ponds on their property. These are people who have built a pond and have filled it with water, and they're now trying to sell that water to oil and gas companies that need it for hydraulic fracturing. And if you drive around out there, you'll see there's a lot of people with signs by the road that say water for sale, call this number. And when we'd call one of those numbers, we'd almost always get somebody who was really excited to find out that they could sell their water on the internet. So we asked ourselves, how do we find all these people who have frac ponds or water impoundments in the Permian Basin? And the problem is you wouldn't drive around an area that is the size of all of New England combined looking for swimming pools in people's backyards, especially when a lot of those backyards are so far from any public road that you'd probably get shot at if you drove on their property to find the swimming pool. And it turns out that in Texas, if you want to dig a ditch on your property and fill it with your groundwater, that's your right as a Texan. There are no regulatory records of who has water pits where, nothing. So it occurred to us that we might be able to see squares of water in the desert from space. And it turns out, yes, we can. And then as we were studying this and looking at all the interesting things we were seeing on the ground in the satellite imagery, we realized, there's a lot of other interesting stuff that we can see on the ground in addition to water pits that nobody is detecting today and that either doesn't get reported in the regulatory records at all or doesn't come out for a year or more. And so this has been the subject of a lot of coverage. We were the cover story of the Journal of Petroleum Technology back in December 2018. We were the cover story of the Houston Chronicle a few months ago, and there's a lot of excitement about this. It's really a breakthrough area. What's come out of all that work is a brand new product that we just announced a couple of weeks ago called Dirt Work Alert. And what we do is we show you new dirt work or new site work on leases months before drilling permits come out or rigs get there. And so basically this allows you to see who is going to be drilling where way before any existing energy data platform can tell you that. So how do we do this? Well, we look at satellite imagery and we try to identify frac ponds and well pads based on using patented machine learning and computer vision methods. And we're drawing from satellite imagery that is very recent. It's actually updated for the entire Permian Basin every 3 to 5 days. One cool thing about that is we're actually able to show you what's on the ground in the Permian Basin every 3 to 5 days, where if you're just going to Google Earth, you're actually usually seeing images that are more than a year old. And there's a lot of things happening on the ground in the Permian in the last year. So our outputs look something like this. We're able to use something called machine learning or deep learning, something called a convolutional neural net model, to be able to identify new well pads every 3 to 5 days as soon as they appear. Same thing with frac ponds. And here's a great example of the different results you get if you're relying on really old, stale imagery in Google Earth compared to the kind of imagery that we are using to show you what's happening in the last few days. So here's a random spot on the map in the Permian Basin in Google Earth a couple of days ago. Now here's that exact same spot in our satellite imagery on that same date. And what you can see is an area that showed nothing in Google Earth our computer vision and machine learning system was able to identify 4 frac ponds, 1 reserve pit, and 1 brand new well pad in that exact same area that occurred in the last 3 to 5 days, where if you were looking at Google Earth, all you saw was an empty field. We're then able to take all of those object identifications and feed them into WaterMap, updating every 3 to 5 days. And what you're seeing right now is actually the only map in the entire world of all of the frac pond and reserve pit locations in the Permian Basin. There is no other source for frac pond and reserve pit locations. We're also able to use this system to identify all of the new dirt work, usually for well pads, though there's other kinds of dirt work that happens on the ground, which shows you who is committing to doing work on their lease and is going to be buying lots of stuff and drilling and producing energy sometime in the near future. In that system, we are able to connect that dirt work to who the likely lease operator is most of the time. And so we're able to figure out who is starting work on their leases often many months before any information about this comes out from the Railroad Commission or the Office of State Engineer or any other energy data platform. So for example, I just happen to look at new dirt activity here. Looks like there's about 200 new pads that were identified for which there is no permit issued yet, and picked out EOG. Let's see where those pads are for EOG. We can zoom in on a particular location, see which are the new pads that don't have permits yet, see which ones are the old pads that do have permits yet, and figure out exactly what they're doing before anything comes out publicly. We're able to do that for every operator on every lease in the Permian Basin. And here's an example of the kind of output we get. We looked at Reeves County over a few-year period, and where you see those red dots, those are new well pads we detected. The red dots turn into green dots when a drilling permit was filed within 500 meters of that well pad. What we found was that on average, during this time period, there was about a 6-month lag time between when a well pad got built and when the drilling permit came out of the Railroad Commission, which is what everyone else in the entire industry relies on to figure out who's going to be drilling where. So we're getting you, in this case, about 6 months ahead of any other data source on what your competition is doing and where the business opportunities are and how much more oil and gas production there is likely to be out in the future. Another area where we're doing something totally new that doesn't exist anywhere else in the industry, and that's the subject of some of our granted and pending patents, is looking at mobile sensor geolocation data to understand minute-by-minute business activity that's happening across the entire oil field supply chain. A sister company of Sourcewater called Wellsite Navigator happens to have built the most popular and trusted oil field app of all time. More than 60,000 people use Wellsite Navigator for the basic fundamental reason that if you're doing a job that involves going to lots of well sites to pick something up, like crude or water, to deliver something, like chemicals or sand, or to service those wells, or frack those wells, or drill those wells, you need to know where the wells are and need navigation to get to them. And Wellsite Navigator is the go-to app that when someone gets a job in the oil and gas business, the first thing they do is they download this app off the App Store. And that's been going on since 2012. And so what we're able to do is interpret the movements of these tens of thousands of oil field workers to understand better what's happening in the oil and gas supply chain. Here's an image that helps show where our folks are. And about half of them are in the Permian Basin. Here's a heat map of where all of our people are driving around. Again, you can see it's in almost every major US oil and gas region. In fact, the data covers 22 states. There are people in 22 states using the system. But a huge portion of them are West Texas and New Mexico, plus a lot in the Bakken, South Texas, Central California, Oklahoma, Colorado. And we're able to use this to create navigable digital maps of all of the dirt lease roads where everybody gets lost and spends all their time in the last mile trying to get to that well bore or well pad or frac pond. So using this kind of tracking, we are able to build networks and maps that show where exactly you should be entering that lease and exactly what path you should take on that maze of dirt roads that aren't in Google, aren't in Waze, aren't in Apple Maps, so that you can do your job quicker and better and faster and get to where you need to go and cover more territory in the same time every day. And there's a lot of applications for that type of information, like figuring out standby times at saltwater disposals, at sand mines, and at midstream injection terminals, so that the dispatchers and logistics folks for every single company can make sure that they are sending those trucks to the place where they can get their job done the fastest, so that they can do more jobs and get paid more by providing a better quality of work, rather than having lots of guys sitting in hours-long lines at the sand mines or the disposals that happen to be the ones that everybody went to because it's Taco Tuesday. The last area that I'm going to talk about today is another really cool breakthrough type of work that we're doing for the upstream energy industry. We have a whole geoscience team here at Sourcewater where we've hired some of the top experts in the field just to understand what's happening in the subsurface with respect to saltwater disposal formations. And it's really important to understand, you might think that out there in the sophisticated geology industry, people know what's going on in the subsurface for water. But the reality is, for 100 years, geologists have been studying the subsurface of the Permian Basin to find the hydrocarbons and get them out. But until now, no one's really been studying the subsurface to understand where can they put the salt water back down. And that is what we are pioneering. A lot of folks in the industry, if they don't really understand what's happening with disposal permits and data, think that you can just look at the drilling permit for a disposal well, usually that's called an H1, and you can know where is that disposal injecting the water. The problem is that is completely and totally wrong, even though most people do it. When a company files for a disposal or injection permit, they pretty much always ask for the biggest possible interval to get the right to inject water throughout that whole interval. Why go through the whole permitting process if you're not going to ask for as much as you can get? That interval might be 5,000 feet from top to bottom. It might be 10,000 feet. But in reality, when that well is completed and perforated and reworked and perforated somewhere else another time, the actual real-world active injection interval is always much, much smaller and much more specific. It might just be a few hundred feet of interval in a few places or one place within that 2,000, 5,000, 10,000 foot permit interval. And knowing that true active injection interval is absolutely critically important to understanding what's happening in that disposal well and what is happening in all of those subsurface formations under the ground. And there's a bunch of reasons for that. If you're buying an existing disposal and you're assuming that you can inject into the entire linear distance of that injection interval that was permitted, you're totally wrong, and you're buying something and paying for capacity that you do not have. And you're going to have to rework that well, maybe, to be able to gain the value that you already paid for. And as a result of that, we estimate that there's over $1 billion of lost value because of companies that bought disposal wells thinking they were getting something much bigger than they were really getting. There's a lot of mistakes made out there because people don't understand how to interpret the data on the disposal wells. The same thing is true if you're trying to drill a new disposal well, because if you are estimating the future capacity of your disposal well that you're drilling based on the performance of other disposal wells in the area, which you have to do, and you are wrongly thinking that they are injecting in a much larger interval than they really are, and you don't know exactly the true active injection interval, then you're going to make big mistakes in where you land that disposal and in your expectations and underwriting for how much water that disposal is going to be able to take. And so what we do on Sourcewater is We have a whole geoscience team that has built all kinds of data science-based algorithms that go back through almost 50 years of wellbore history for every single disposal and injection well in the entire Permian Basin in Texas and New Mexico. And we figure out exactly where each and every disposal and injection well is really injecting that water, exactly how deep beneath the surface, not what it says on the permit, and then the pressure, porosity, and permeability of all of those porous subsurface formations. And as we talked about before, there's actually 47 potential disposal formations across the Permian Basin, even though most people only use 2 or 3 of them. Why? Because that's what everyone else uses. The problem is, if you look at a map like what I'm showing here, some of those traditional injection formations are getting really full and really overpressured, and that creates a lot of problems in the industry. If you're in the Midland Basin and you're drilling through the overpressured San Andres Formation where a lot of salt water's been injected, not only do you risk a blowout as you're drilling through it, but also when you drill through it, you have a big risk that you're now going to force salt water into your hydrocarbon reservoir below that formation that you're drilling through. So you need to know exactly where those disposal formations are, and you need to know exactly what their pressure levels are. Another issue is if you drill through an underpressured porous formation, basically you can lose your drill bit or lose the string as it drops down, or if you're drilling through a mix of overpressured and underpressured formations, you can have situations where the water rushes from the overpressured formation at one level to the underpressured formation at a different level and basically pushes your drill bit or your string into that formation. Then you lose it and you have to start all over again. So there are huge risks in drilling through these porous formations that either have a lot or a little water in them. And Sourcewater is creating the first real maps of where those formations are, their tops and their bottoms, and their key formation characteristics. This allows you to make better decisions about where exactly to land your new saltwater disposal. And in some cases, there's all kinds of interesting trade-offs. Of course, the deeper you drill, the more expensive it is. But the shallow wells can be harder to permit and are in places that are overpressured because they're cheaper to build, and so a lot more water goes there. And then the deep formations have much greater seismicity risks, and so even though you might think there's a lot of capacity down there, and there would seem to be physically in terms of porosity and pressure, you can't really push those pressure levels because you could cause seismic events. And so you have to be really careful and understand that trade-off. But there's a whole lot of other places in between that nobody's using where you could put your water and avoid protests and avoid the seismic risks and avoid overpressured situations. We map all of that out for you instantly. So what we've been talking about for about the past hour are new tools and intelligence for oil field water, understanding the market, and some of the new technologies and innovations that we've been developing to help our clients really understand what's going on the surface and in the subsurface, in the past, in the present, and even into the future. We looked at the different places that we gather our data from, our marketplace listings, all kinds of government records for which we apply all kinds of data science-based data integrity and quality assurance methods that aren't available from anywhere else. We looked at some really cool stuff we're doing with satellite imagery analytics that show you what's happening on the ground today that otherwise you'd have to wait sometimes a year or more to know it already happened. We looked at what we're doing with mobile sensor geospatial data to be able to map in real time what's happening in the upstream energy supply chain. And we looked at some of the new geoscience methods that we've been developing here to understand and map in 3D, really in 4D, what's happening under the ground in the Permian Basin and other key shale plays so that you understand what's going to happen when you drill through those layers and where you can put that water and how much water is going to come out. Thank you very much for your time listening to our webinar today. We look forward to hearing from you at sourcewater.com. Please give us a call at 713-909-4664 or visit our website and request a demo. We'd love to meet you. Thanks very much. Have a great day.